Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special online event today called Discover the Heart of Activism, Feminine Leadership for Bold, Authentic Change with Marianne, Williamson, and Heidi Harmon. My name is Stephen Dine. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network, and I am so thrilled to be with you here today, really being inspired and learning from two of the brightest female political, spiritual lights of our day. I'm blown away by both of these women. Marianne Williamson has been a friend, ally, mentor, inspiration, and guide for several decades now. She's also extremely well known as the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, including 4 that were hit #1. But probably most importantly now, she has taken the very bold step of running for president of the United States. There's a real opportunity for us to rally behind her and get her voice out in the public sphere and really celebrate someone who's marrying the depth of spirituality and activism into this beautiful new hybrid. And I also want to say Mayor Heidi Harmon, who's with us today, she's working more at the grassroots level. You may not have heard of her yet, but you will, because she is one of America's most progressive mayors. She's led the way for San Luis Obispo to have the boldest goals for climate change. And she's also a very unique hybrid of yogi and conscious activist and mom and really doing politics in a very new and very sophisticated way. So welcome to you both.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So Marianne, let's start with you. So we're talking a lot about a new kind of activism, one that really brings more of us into that it's not just the old style, battle for supremacy, that there's like a fullness, a consciousness, a heart and soul that's welcomed. I'd love for you to share a little bit about how that fusion and hybrid has infused your own journey and into politics as well.
Well, first of all, actually, what we're talking about here is not new at all, Stephen. This politics that's so disconnected from the heart, that's the aberration. You can go back to the Indian independence movement and the works of Mahatma Gandhi on nonviolence. The whole point of nonviolence was that, according to Gandhi, there's an inner light within every man, woman, and child. And Dr. King, of course, then went to India, traveled there to study the principles of nonviolence and bring them back for application to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. What Mahatma Gandhi articulated was the idea that that light, that love inside people, heals not only individual relationships, but also political relationships. So this is not some new wheel we're inventing. I think that we're a generation that loves to think that whenever we have a good idea, we came up with it first, but actually that's rarely true. So I think what we're doing now is reclaiming not only the deep philosophical connectedness of the spirit, the spirituality and politics, which was core to the Indian independence movement and also core to the U.S. To the civil rights movement. But also for me, when I was growing up, I always say, when I was in college, we would read Ram Dass in the morning and go to an anti-war protest in the afternoon. So this disconnection is what's strange. All we're doing is reclaiming a more natural balance. If you have spiritual convictions, the whole point of spirituality, or the path of the heart, is its universal applicability. Everything should be an expression of the heart. Politics should be an expression of the heart just because everything should be an expression of the heart. It's just an expression of our collective journey. So if the individual journey should be filled with love and heart and compassion, then the collective journey should be filled with love and heart and compassion as well.
It's such an important perspective, particularly in the toxic, polarizing landscape that we have now. Heidi, I'd love for you also, Mayor Harmon, I should probably call you, but I know you more as Heidi, so I'll say Heidi.
Please call me Heidi.
Let's for you get your perspective on this infusion of heart into politics. It's really important medicine for our times and how that's lived in you.
Well, I completely agree with Marianne, and I think that really what we're talking about when we're talking about politics and everything in life, but in some ways politics in particular is love, right? I mean, why do we want what we want in terms of the policies that we're fighting for, the future that we're fighting for, the communities and the country that we're fighting for? This is about the love that we have, the love for our children, the love for future generations, the love for our planet, and the love for a more just and sustainable world. And I think that a lot of folks haven't really been using that word, and there's a vulnerability in that, and there's a real power in that. And I think that it's absolutely essential. And we're really, even though Marianne is absolutely accurate that this has been a thread throughout history, I do think that there is a paradigm shift happening, and this is a new time in some ways for more folks and more types of folks to be coming forward talking about these issues in the context of love and the context of what that looks like. You know, I think of Dr. Cornel West, right, and who talks about justice is what love looks like in public, you know, and these are the kinds of ideas that I think are really starting to permeate the culture in general and are especially really rising up in the political sphere. And it's something that I try and lead with here at the local level is my love for my children, my love for the next generation that they're a part of, and my love for my community is a guiding principle and a lens that leads me to lead here locally with a lens on the future itself. And that really all comes from a heart-centric, love-centered place.
So, Marianne, how do you see that this is part of the surge of women into the political sphere, into activism, into more leadership? It's really, you've founded Sister Giant. You've been a champion for more women running for office. How does this conversation connect with the rise of women's leadership too?
Well, obviously, this rise of women's leadership is simply something that is happening. It's something that the mayor just said that I want to go back to. When she was talking about the fact that to talk about love makes us vulnerable. And then and I don't know if I should say you, Heidi, because you're right here. When you then mentioned, you quoted Cornel West. Notice Cornel West can talk about how justice is love in action. Or Martin Luther King could talk about love. Or David Brooks can talk about love. My point here being they're all men. And nobody says it's a soft subject. Nobody suggests that it's just soft stuff, it's not the real thing. And I think that, you have written that incredible piece, Stephen, talking about these deeper issues of worldview. So I've noticed that. So if the mayor talks about love or I talk about love, there's a, hey, what do you mean? Well, what about the hard politics that a man is usually not questioned about? And I think that has made a lot of women, I think Hillary Clinton was an example, kind of this overcompensation, this fear of appearing soft as in weak. I hope we're passing through this time now because some of us are simply doing it. And of course, if you look at someone like Cory Booker, he talks about love. It's a lot more common now than it was. But I think it's really important when people like the mayor have an actual political office and talks about it unabashedly. So thank you for that. You're helping every other woman feel more permitted to do it.
Well, Heidi, I kind of want to get the two of you in dialogue because I find you both so inspiring. So I just encourage you to respond, from your heart to what Marianne has shared.
Well, I mean, she couldn't be more right, and it's so important for people to know. And I think they do know, which is why they're afraid of it, right? That love takes so much courage, right? And love is fierce. You look at the animal kingdom and you see that maternal love in particular really showing up as strength and fierceness in a way that no other animal can, right? And so this is something that I think is misunderstood about this word. Yes, there is a soft strength that can come from love, but it's definitely a strength. Love is why we're all here ultimately. And I'll speak for myself. Love is why I'm here on the planet and why I'm here doing the work, showing up every day, really butting up against my edge every day, trying as hard as I can, because I love my kids, because I love this planet, and because I love the people on it. And I feel called that in this pivotal moment in history, that love is calling me up to do the work of making sure that we have those things moving forward. I mean, let's be really clear about this moment that we're living in. This is a potentially penultimate moment of human existence. There are a lot of things that are challenging us right now, and climate crisis, to me, is the defining issue of our time. And it is an issue that makes it so clear how interconnected we all are and how intersectional all of the issues are that we're faced with. And this is about love that calls us up to make sure that we have a planet and a future that we can move toward, creating that vision for the planet that we want to have moving forward. And this is all coming from love, but it's not necessarily about being nice, right? And I think Marianne brings up a really good point about females in particular and the nexus of love. I think she talked about Cory Booker, and I just heard an interview with him, and I was surprised and delightfully surprised to hear him talking about love, and was noticing that too. Like, here's a guy from Newark, New Jersey, talking about love, and it works differently, right, than when I show up talking about it, or Marianne or other women show up talking about it. And, as we know, we live in a fairly misogynist culture at a very misogynist time, and this is something that female-identified folks showing up in these spaces have an extra layer that is a part of the conversations that we're in. But I'm so grateful that more women than ever are showing up. We still have a long way to go to parity, but we are definitely changing the culture and changing the paradigm around what love actually looks like.
I remember when I was in college being so mesmerized by the quote from Teilhard de Chardin that said, "One day after man has mastered the tides and the winds and gravity, he will harness for God the energies of love. And then for the second time in human history, mankind will have discovered fire." Now, when I used to read that decades ago, I thought it was so beautiful, but I thought it was aspirational. I didn't think of it the way I think of it now. Because the way I think of it now, harnessing the energies of love is the only survivable option for the human race. Our future is not going to be determined by how many weapons we have. It's not going to be determined by how much money we have, and it's not going to be determined by how much energy we have, even if it's sustainable energy. The keys to our ability to create a sustainable Earth in an ultimate sense have to do with the development of the human brain and developing our capacity to love one another, which has a lot to do with the development of the human brain, because the greatest hope for mankind is that we begin to infuse compassion into the intellectual development of early childhood. And taking care of children, of course, you talk about the feminine, and the mayor has mentioned a few times, my children, love of my children, love of my children. One of the things I'm dealing with my own political journey when I talk about a department of childhood and youth, children and youth. This is where children bear the brunt of our insanity more than anyone else does, and children offer the hope of our repair more than anyone else does. So it's a very feminine issue to nourish, to nurture, but specifically to act on that nurturing and nourishment, and that is specifically begins with our children. And where we are moving is the realization that the love that will save the world is not just my children or your children, but all of our children, even the children of the mothers on the other side of town, the children of the mothers on the other side of the earth. There's a particular aspect of love, that agape love. There's a particular enlightened love that feels the piercing of the heart for the mother who had her child torn from her at the border. But I'll tell you something, as far as women of America are concerned, where were we when the mothers of Baghdad were about to have their homes and their families and their land completely bombed to smithereens, and we so easily acquiesced to the propaganda that led us into the invasion of Iraq?
Mm-hmm. For me, I feel like this manifests itself as wanting to build bigger tables and not higher walls, wanting to and be totally comfortable and clear about being tough on issues but soft on people. And so these are very subtle but important differences, I think, when people are showing up from a place of love. I think, simply put, it seems to me that fear is what's gotten us to this place, and love is the only way we're going to get out of some of these really deep challenges that we face. And so it seems like the universe is really making it clear that you are all connected, we are all connected, these issues are all connected, and having a love and an understanding for all people and an empathy for all people regardless of how they're showing up, and figuring out how we can engage with them and invite them to also come from a more loving place is the only pathway out of these challenges.
Whether it's any of us, politicians included, If it's just a lot of talk about love, then that's not enough. We have to make love participatory in a whole new way. That's why I've been talking even to the higher consciousness community. It's a complete disconnect when you have a whole community of people talking about love all the time, but completely disconnected from politics, when politics is such a conduit and such a channel for force, whether that force is in the service of fear or force that's in the service of love. So I think at this point we have to look at all of the places where we are heartless, where our economic system is heartless, where our policies toward children is heartless, where our foreign policies are heartless. You know, we, for the sake of $100 billion arms sales, are partnering basically with the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He is prosecuting a genocidal war in Yemen. Tens of thousands of people have starved, including all those children whose heartbreaking pictures are all over the internet. He could not be prosecuting that war without the aerial support that he's getting from our military hardware. And our Secretary of State has said that you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. Well, no, you can't. That means you sacrifice your values. So this is an example where I feel so strongly about our community, particularly, is don't talk to me about love if you're not going to point out that nothing could be more loveless than to be willing, for the sake of a $100 billion arms sale, participate in that kind of criminality, international criminality. So I think the point for me is that real things happen when people are loving, and real things happen when people are fearful. You know, metaphysically, fear is to love what darkness is to light. But especially talking about politics, and you know this is the mayor, and this is true on a local level, it's true on a state level, it's true on a national level. When you're backing up, whether it's love or fear, whether your policies are infused with love or your policies are infused with fear, the money involved, the force involved, the technology involved is going to affect someone's life. So we need to take very, very seriously not only that love is the answer, but asking ourselves, what does that look like? And facing the fact that when a policy is not loving, great harm can and is being done.
I mean, absolutely. When people say, well, I'm not political or I don't want to get political, it's frustrating. And I want to invite them to recognize that that in and of itself is a very political act. And this is one of the things that I'm interested about in the spirituality community, and especially as it manifests through yoga, is that there's a lot of folks spending a lot of time on their mat, hopefully working on their inner self, which is, of course, key, and wanting to invite them to and call them up, right? It's not about calling people out, but calling them up and off the mat to say, okay, what is skill in action? What do the 8 limbs of yoga guide us to understand about what yoga it really is? You know, what's going on the mat is only one piece of it. How can we take those skills, that time that we have to spend doing the inner work, what are we doing the inner work for? If not, to take the strength that we're gaining through that, the depth of understanding into our own selves through that, off the mat, and to offer that strength and understanding to be part of making the world a better place. And there's just no time for being apolitical. And in my opinion, that doesn't exist anyway. That's an overtly political act. You know, there's so much at stake. And as you know, the president is getting closer and closer and has been this whole time, but the language that he's using, calling entire groups of people animals, right, is language that we've heard in the past, and we know the consequences of not taking action around standing up against that type of language and standing with folks that need that strength of us standing with them. And so there's really no space for not having a political lens on life, and that can manifest itself in all kinds of ways. You know, for Marianne and I, it's led to running for office, but there's a lot of other ways that we can show up in our daily lives, in our family lives, in our work lives, and in our community lives, to understand that this is a pivotal moment and that we're all called to really, show up and step up and take a stand on these crucial issues.
I love these brilliant insights. And one of the subjects that I think is often most challenging around becoming this fierce love in action and really addressing situations that stir anger and outrage. And a lot of times in new consciousness arenas, there's a bit of a myth of rigid positivity or positive all the time. So, Marianne, I know you're one of the most illuminating people to talk about how to take some of what the emotions that we sometimes don't validate in the new conscious material and turn them into evolutionary forces for the good. So I'd love for you to reflect a little on that.
Well, we often talk in our personal lives about how you shouldn't do a spiritual bypass. You don't want to just pour pink paint over your issues and pretend that they don't exist. That's not transcendence, that's denial. But the same is true in our political lives. This idea that you're being positive by just not looking. There's nothing positive about that. There's nothing holy about complacency. And there's nothing negative about yelling fire if, in fact, the house is burning down. So there is no serious spiritual or religious path or tradition that gives anyone a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And the last thing anybody has a right to do is to use some counterfeit version of spirituality as a justification for not being there while your brother bleeds in front of you. And that's what we're talking about here. We can use all the kind of highfalutin words we want, but the issue is human suffering. The issue is the millions of American children, for instance, who are going to school every single day, many of them hungry. 41 million people are food insecure in this country. Millions of them are children. Going to schools, and schools that don't even have the adequate teaching supplies to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot read by the age of 8, that child is less likely to graduate from high school and more likely to be incarcerated someday. Love would mean that we would rescue these children. Love means that we would rescue these children no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. So this idea of wanting to be positive, in the Christian religion, the crucifixion does precede the resurrection. And in the Jewish religion, the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt precedes their deliverance to the promised land. And in Buddhism, it was only when Buddha saw suffering for the first time that his heart was opened and he began his journey to enlightenment. So you can't leave out the rough stuff and be on a serious spiritual path, either in your own personal growth or in your contribution to the growth of the larger collective of which you're part.
Beautiful insights. And Heidi, I'd love to go back to you. And so I think one of the things that happens when people are afraid, they do this spiritual bypass to really face into the suffering, face into the challenges, is that they're going to kind of be overwhelmed with that. They're going to work so hard, they're going to burn out. And so I'd love you to share a little bit about how you approach the notion of self-care and really keeping yourself full and vibrant and whole so that your activism is sourced from a place that is not like in the burnout mode.
That's such a key question. And just to circle back a little bit to what Marianne was just saying, I think that getting in touch with your anger and your true feelings is essential for all of us. I think it's especially important for women. We're constantly told that, we're not allowed to get angry, especially. But I think if you look at the women that are really showing up right now in the political sphere, whether it's in electoral politics or in activism as a general category, these are women that are enraged in a lot of ways. And that absolutely needs to not only be okay, but I think really needs to be honored in a lot of ways. And so those kinds of feelings, if you're not upset, right, you're not paying attention right now. And then really the question then is not about whether to get upset or not, or to be angry or not, or have these feelings or not, but it's really what we do next, how we articulate those feelings, how we move into action around those things that are causing us to feel so much anger, rage, fear, sadness, all of those things. So I think that we really need to be mindful about how we talk about that, especially in the context of women in particular. And so in terms of taking care of ourselves, this is another key component, because we need a sustainable movement of movements to really do the work that needs to be done at this moment in time. And so there's been a lot of conversation lately about self-care, and a lot of wondering about what that really looks like. So you'll often see, especially on social media, folks showing what their self-care looks like, and it's a facial and a hot bath, right? And that's important. So not to suggest that those moments aren't important, and they are. But I think it's a lot deeper and a lot bigger than that. So it's really about showing up as our authentic selves. I think if we're showing up in a way that we think we should, but it's not authentic to us, that's not going to be sustainable, and that's not going to be an aspect of taking care of ourselves for the long game. But I think ultimately the thing that is the ultimate act of self-care, right? Because self-care, I think, we hear that and it can be an aspect of escape, right? And self-care, escaping life in some way. But I think the ultimate act of self-care is being part of creating a world for which we don't need to escape. So I actually find that my own activism, to a large extent, is a big part of my self-care. And, we do need to take breaks and have moments of solitude and introspection, yoga, meditation, journaling, all of those things to make sure that we're kind of coming back to self and coming back to source, being grounded, because it's a pretty contentious time, and activism is rooted in the active, right? So it's about being out there in public and being out in a space where we're going to be taking on a lot of energy. And so ensuring that in the cycle of our activism that we do take some time out for introspection and solitude, with the understanding that the ultimate act is really creating a better world.
Beautiful. Marianne, I'd love to just hear a little bit about how that's manifested in your own life. I mean, running for president is no small task, and the forces at play are extremely intense. And so just love to share a little bit on the inner side of how you're navigating that.
Well, I certainly understand the legitimate aspects of self-care, that you try to get sleep, that you don't feel that you have to answer everybody's demand on your time, that you don't have to answer to every cluttered issue that would keep you away from your own, as Heidi was saying, reflection, solitude, and so forth. But at the same time, I have some disrespect for the way the whole concept of self-care has been used recently. There's, like I said, obviously we all know we got to take time to meditate. You got to take time to reflect. Blaise Pascal said every problem in the world stems from man's inability to be silent in a room alone. And I think that's true. But I hear self-care these days talked about as a justification for what we've just always called selfishness. These are very serious times. We really need everybody to show up. And I am concerned, as long as we're talking about women and women's leadership, we all need to look at ourselves. And we need to look at ourselves not only as individuals, but as a movement. I think American women are not porcelain dolls. I hear a lot of people talk about how traumatized they are. Well, these are traumatizing times, don't get me wrong. But the people who walked across the bridge at Selma were certainly traumatized. And they were traumatized because they didn't even know if they were going to bring the dogs out, or the hoses, or the bullets. Surely our great-great-great-grandmothers who marched for suffrage and were thrown in prison, and when the prison conditions were so bad, went on a hunger strike, at which point the prison guards put those metal contraptions around their necks and force-fed them. I think that would be a traumatizing experience. So I think that there's some preciousness that has emerged from some of our deep sensitivity. I think we need to have grace and grit. I think we need to be soft, and I think we need to be tough. Like when Heidi was saying, we need to be fierce.
Well, thank you both for brilliant insights on all of these different dimensions, particularly on the inner side. So I want to shift gears a little bit and look at the bigger why. Like that's so much at the heart of why we get engaged in activism. And Marianne, maybe first from you, since you're running for president, and focusing on the America of what's possible. So what is really the core of your motivation for what is it that you're wanting to birth through your campaign or empower and ennoble in America?
Well, it's like when Heidi was talking originally about her work with the carbon-free a commitment in San Luis Obispo and about the climate crisis and so forth. And when I was saying that the consequences of heartlessness are dangerous. They're dangerous to our democracy and possibly to future generations and even the sustainability of life on Earth. So I'm running for president because I believe with a country, just like with individuals, you don't heal if you don't have a real conversation. It's like when Heidi was talking before about being authentic. Authenticity is not just about me being authentic to how I feel at the moment. Authenticity, as I'm sure she agrees being mayor, is about, are we talking about the things that matter most? Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter most. Those millions of American children who are trapped in chronic trauma and all we're doing is normalizing their despair, that matters. The fact that we spend, for $1, every dollar we spend on ways to wage peace, we spend over $1,000 on ways to prepare for war, that matters. The fact that we have 12, it's like when Heidi was saying earlier, it's a penultimate moment in the human race. We have, 12 years to deal with climate crisis in a way that is fundamental. Somebody said to me the other day, that same old question about how we're going to pay for it. Well, I'd rather pay for it with money than pay for it with our lives. With all these things, I'd rather pay for them with money than pay for them with our democracy, the death of our democracy, which, by the way, doesn't even speak to the issue that how you're going to pay for it is a totally bogus question, because this is the richest country in the world. And they never say that when they're talking about a $2 trillion tax cut that gives 83 cents of every dollar to the wealthiest among us. So I believe that the people who are part of the higher consciousness community are the last people who should be standing on the sidelines. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. Because if you're someone who knows how one life changes, you're the one who knows how to change the world, because all that a country is a collection of individuals. And we need to have a fierce and authentic conversation about what's happening in this country, what's happening with race, what's happening with mass incarceration, what's happening with racial disparity in the criminal justice system, what's happening, whether or not we should pay reparations, how are we going to save these children, what are we going to do about the climate crisis, how are we going to deal with automation that's coming like a tsunami, are we going to have a federal jobs guarantee, are we going to have a universal basic income, are we going to do we even have an agenda for peace? And the answer is no. All we have an agenda is how to prepare for war in the 21st century. If you want an agenda for peace, oddly enough, no shock to anyone, the 4 factors that create peace statistically and diminish violence are expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, reducing violence against women, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. This is the cry of the feminine in men or women, to love one another, to care for one another. Love one another is not only a should, it's a prescription for the only way we will ultimately survive. So all of us, in whatever way, you, Steve, with Stephen with the Shift Network, Heidi with being mayor, and who knows where she'll go with that, Heidi with your own political career, my running for president, I think that we're all answering the call. Gandhi said that the leader of the Indian independence movement was the small, still voice within. And I think that's what happens when you meditate. That's what happens when you do yoga. That's what happens when you become mindful and reflective. You hear the call of the ages as it rushes through your veins. The whispers of your ancestors, the whispers of your descendants, the whisper of the heart is the only proper guidance system for our personal lives and for the life of nations and the species as a whole.
Wow. Wow, Marianne, that was an incredibly powerful diagnosis of where we're at and the medicine that we need to move forward. And I just want to take a moment to say how important I think it is for all of us, everybody who's watching this, to get behind your campaign. We have contributed, we've got out the word, and I want people to really get how important it is for this amazingly beautiful synthesis of truth and love and wisdom and fierceness that really, and real diagnosis of what ails us in a deeper way than I think any other candidate can. How important that is for America and for our future, that's part of the debates, that it's part of the collective conversation. So I encourage everyone who's watching now to go to Marianne2020.com and contribute whatever you can. I think there's 20,000 or so people that you still need to get into the debates. And so it's, even if it's $1, it's like, just get on the list, empower this voice. This is a beautiful soul who is really championing the future we need. So I just want to really share that hopefully right now.
Can I just say on that, I don't think I realized before this election how important getting people on the debate stage was and how that really worked. So I would just encourage people, a lot of times people are already hunkered down around their candidate, and supporting several candidates that you want to make sure are part of the conversation, I think is really, really key. For those of us that identify with the word progressive, I would say this is a very progressive act to take, that making sure that the voices are heard, that are an essential part of the conversation and the dialogue. And that happens by contributing. So people may not understand that I think on your website, Marianne, it makes it clear that you can, even just donating $1, is important. And so sometimes I think we can get really uncomfortable feeling like that's not enough, why bother? But in this particular case, it's really important to include people in this conversation, and especially voices like Marianne's.
Amen.
Well, thank you to both of you so much for that support. It means so much to me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I know you've got a really busy schedule, Marianne. You've already been generous with your time. I think probably the easiest thing, we're going to transition and talk with Heidi more about activating the bigger why, but I think you need to get on to your next event. So just first, a deep bow of gratitude for sharing this time with us, sharing your wisdom, really putting yourself out there, showing this incredible courage to stand as a candidate who's speaking truth, sometimes about very powerful forces that don't want that truth to be shared. So thank you for your own version of the Selma Bridge that you are taking on with your candidacy. So
thank you so much, Stephen. You and David have been so kind to me. Thank you, and so generous. Love to the baby. And also, Heidi, it's wonderful actually to meet you here, sort of in person. And I look forward to meet you actually in person someday. And God bless with everything that you're doing in one of my favorite towns.
You too. If you need a VP, you can give me a call.
At the conference of mayors. We'll see what happens. Thank you.
Sounds great. Okay. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Well, Heidi, so it's just the two of us now, and I think we want to turn now from some of the big picture stuff to the most intimate. So the people who have gathered here today are all genuinely concerned about the state of the world, want to show up in this new way. And I'm wondering if you could just reflect a little bit about the process to undergo to really find what is that highest contribution. What is the thing that you may not even think yourself capable of that could be your biggest impact? Like I'm sure 10 or 15 years ago, the idea of you might have been like, I'm going to be the mayor of San Luis Obispo. You might have been like, you're crazy. So I'd love you to just reflect a little bit and help guide us in how each person who's participating today can activate their bigger why and make their bigger contribution.
Sure. Maybe I'll start by just sharing briefly a little bit about my story, because you're absolutely right. I think 15 or 20 years ago, if someone had said you're going to be mayor someday, that would have sounded ridiculous to me. I think even back then, I maybe didn't even know who the mayor was in my community. So definitely not connected to what was happening politically, especially on the local level. Raising my kids as a single mom, really focused on that process, really feeling like at that point, the way I could contribute most to the world, the way I could make the world a better place was by supporting and sort of making better kids. And sort of right in the middle of that process of raising them, a climate crisis came and sort of gave me a gut punch in terms of the urgency and the reality of that issue. And so that was the issue that activated me and that motivated me, and my concerns around that and my children's future really motivated me. And so I slowly started to get more involved, and I joined groups, started groups, and sort of started to figure out what it might be like to be able to make a difference. And that eventually led me to run for office in 2014, the same year that Marianne ran for Congress. We were both running for office, and we both lost, actually, in the traditional sense of the word, but I think it was a big win for both of us in terms of being able to change the conversation around the issues and the tone and tenor that we were interested in creating in the political sphere. And I eventually then actually went to a Sister Giant event that following year that Marianne put on, and that led me to run for mayor in 2016. And I won by a very small margin of 46 votes, and just by way of background, I don't have a traditional political experience at all. I'm not an attorney or a poli-sci major or any of those things that you might expect or anticipate in terms of who gets to sort of pursue these electoral positions. And so one of the things I want to make sure people really hear is that, yes, we are talking to you. Yes, it can be you and you needs to be you, and that in my own experience, I kept looking for someone that I could follow, looking for someone to take the lead on the issues that I cared about most. And when no one showed up, I decided that person might need to be me, right? And it's a perfect example of the idea of we are the ones that we have been looking for. And so I slowly started to gain skills in this area, and it's led me to the position I am today. And I've been able to make a meaningful and measurable difference, which is really affirming. And so I think a part of the process and a part of what we'll be talking about in the course is figuring that out for you. What is it? What lights you up? Where are you already right now? What in your life is already a place where you feel like your strengths are really shining? And then what issue or issues are of concern to you? And how can you sort of meld those and amplify both of those to contribute to and show up in the world and start to make a difference? I think it's not about we have this idea of what an activist might be or what a politician is, and those are really changing. And I think we are activists. We are implicitly political in this moment in time. And I think that I'm really interested in expanding that vision for people. And so I think we hopefully know it when we feel it, when we're in our strengths, when we're in a space where we're really lit up, when we're engaging on the issues that we really care about, and really drilling down on that why and amplifying that when we show up in the world to empower and enliven and lift people up to join us in a movement of movements to create the world that we want to see.
Well, I love what you share. It's just music to my ears, and you're such an inspiration yourself. And we will talk a little bit more about your upcoming program in just a few minutes. But I also want to I know you were going to guide people in a little process of connecting with their bigger why, just so that each of us is able to see that potential, to see that deeper commitment, and then it allows us to take these big leaps and to make the courageous steps and to speak the hard truth sometimes.
Right. So when I'm thinking about that, for me, a lot of my why comes from, I have a very strong maternal orientation, and I've had that long before I had kids. And it's not even necessarily about being an actual mother, although I am in this case. And I feel strongly called, and a big part of my why, and I can feel it even as I'm talking. And so this is a part of figuring out what is your why. You can feel it when you're paying attention, especially to the body. I'm getting emotional thinking about that. I feel like when I brought my kids into the world, I made a commitment to them to do the best that I can to ensure that they have a thriving place, and that I'm creating a more fair and just and sustainable world. And I think that's why climate crisis in particular really hits me right in my why, because climate crisis is really getting in the way of me being able to facilitate that sacred promise that I made to them to ensure a future for them to the best of my ability. And so I think, when we have these feelings. That's why I think feelings are so key to figuring out the why. And I hear what Marianne was saying about being conscious and mindful about rage and anger and those things that can lead us get us off track and lead us in a wrong direction, and definitely lead us to a place of fear. But also, I think it's really important to, when we feel those things, to really recognize that and take a pause and say, okay, I'm really feeling upset. I'm really feeling angry. I'm really feeling sadness, right? And as we know, most of the anger is coming from a place of fear and sadness. So what are these things that I'm noticing about myself? And then also, what are my strengths? And we'll go through some exercises to drill down more on that. But we feel that. What is making me come alive? Where do I feel most empowered myself? And how can I utilize that space of empowerment to empower others? I was thinking about my why. And I think if you had asked me a couple years ago, what is your why? I would have said, I want to save the world, right? And that's a real simplified version of, I think, a lot of the work that we're doing. But having evolved since that initial impulse, I think now a big part of my why is recognizing that it's not mine to save the world, but what I can do is empower and embolden and be a part of that for other people, so that they can be a part of saving themselves, and so that we can unite and grow a movement that addresses ultimately the major systemic changes that we need.
Beautiful. Well, you are an amazing inspiration, and I know that people are going to be so blessed to go on a journey of empowerment with you. And so I want to talk really explicitly about your upcoming program now. The program is called The Heart of Activism for Empowered Women, Feminine Leadership for Bold, Authentic Change to Transform Ourselves and the World. And you can see it at theheartofactivism.com. It's all laid out in a lot of detail. Again, theheartofactivism.com. A little bit of backstory on this is, we've really recognized at Shift is that we cannot shift our world unless we shift our society, and we need to bridge the higher consciousness work and the healing work and the transformational work with the work of shifting governance and policy and how we do democracy. And sometimes there's been a bit of a historical gap between those, or people pull back, something we talked about in the call. And so we really wanted to have a program that would bridge these worlds in a way that's seamless, that's integrated and whole. And we needed somebody who really walks with a foot in both worlds. And Mayor Harmon, as you've heard, she's amazing on a policy level, has really done innovative things in governance, and she's also really articulate about the inner life of activism and the processes of transformation and emotional development that turn us into really inspiring leaders. She's a yogi and she's a mayor, and so we thought, what an incredible combination to bring to you, to learn from and to empower you, and really share what she's learned in her journey from being a mom and an activist to a mayor who's really influencing people around the world and wants to influence more people like you to become mayors or school board leaders or nonprofit leaders, to really express your bigger why at the level that you can to really be a part of this larger shift in the world. So Heidi, I'd love for you to share in your own words. Again, the URL for this program is theheartofactivism.com. It's a 7-week program, and you're really going to go deep with people. And I'd love for you to share what you're excited about in terms of guiding this journey.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I am really excited about it. I was, working on it and really taking a deep look at how I got to where I am, and really wishing that this was a course that I had been able to take 15 years ago when I was first getting started in my activism work. I think that it will be really helpful to skill up. I think that's a huge barrier to all kinds of folks, but I think women in particular really struggle with feeling like we're not enough, we're not ready, we're not good enough, we don't know enough. As an example, generally speaking, women have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they'll consider it. And that sense of not being ready and not knowing enough is a big barrier to that. Whereas men, I think, oftentimes don't have to be asked at all, right, to run for office, and they're coming from a totally different place. And so gaining some of these skills, wherever it leads you in terms of the way you show up on the issues that you care about, I think will be really empowering and really helpful. We'll also be creating creating a community. So we'll have a Facebook group and a community that we'll be able to share in on a regular basis, get some feedback from each other and some support from each other. And so there's 7 modules, and I think each one will be a nice combination of delving into the interior, doing the inner work of our why and taking care of ourselves and all of those things, with the intention of gaining strength and skills to show up in the world in a way that really makes a meaningful difference. And so I am looking forward to that. I know we're talking about the feminine, and we're inviting women in particular, and I just want to take a brief moment to invite all folks, however they identify, to recognize the value in feminine leadership. I think that we understand that the ideas around gender are really shifting. The language around gender are shifting, and our understanding about what gender constructs and binary ideas around that are shifting. And definitely my understanding of that has really evolved over the years as well. And I think there's something that is still very much articulated in the somewhat limited language, but still important, of the feminine. And that can show up in all kinds of bodies. And also as an important grounding to understand that, yes, I think women in particular are called to really step up and stand up in this crucial time. You know, we've gained a lot in the last couple of years, especially in the last election cycle in terms of representation at the electoral level, but we still have a far road ahead of us. Generally speaking, we're still only about 20% of all electoral positions, and I think even less in terms of corporate boards and things like that. And so I think it is still really important to be specific about inviting and empowering women and girls to really step up into their full power at this time. I think when I'm thinking about this course, what I've been wondering about is the Women's March and how important and impactful that was and is in individual women's lives and as a movement in general. Heard from so many women of different ages and backgrounds that was, as far as they understand it, their first real act of activism. And that's wonderful. And it's not enough, right? It's not enough to march in the streets. We really need to march into City Hall and to our state capitals and to Washington, D.C. and onto our corporate and nonprofit boards and into the organizations that need to hear from us. That's where we really need to be marching. And so this program aims to skill people up in order to have the skills to figure out the pathway from marching in the streets, and in addition to marching in the streets, to really march into being able to make effective and long-term change.
I love that. And one of the things that's really clear is that this is an amazing program for people who are maybe contemplating running for office and want to see how to do it. It's also a great program for people who want to support others who are running for office or being part of that process. Since it really does take a village to raise up a candidate, it's whatever role you're feeling called to be in, as you're saying, whether it's a school board or whether it's about influencing the electoral dynamics. It's really about becoming an empowered, skillful, conscious, heart-centered agent of positive change in the society. And what I've found in my own life is that it's a great deepener and expression of the spiritual path. It's in many ways, it's like the natural next step as you've cultivated more consciousness to then out of love and concern for our future, to then help shape the future in a really new way. And so I really honor the powerful intentions behind this, and also your incredible experience that you're going to be sharing with folks. So this is going to be a live stream video course, so you can ask live questions of Mayor Harmon and really engage her. She wants to make herself available to really empower you. She's hoping that there are going to be many people that do run for office from this and that support others. And so it's an opportunity for you to say yes to your bigger why, and to also let go of any sense of limitation of how much positive impact you can have. So I'd love for you, Mayor Harmon, to have you walk through the modules. It's going to be on Wednesdays at noon Pacific time, every week at noon for 7 weeks, and you can see this laid out in a little more detail at the Heart of Activism. But maybe just give a little highlight from each of the weeks of what's coming.
Sure. what we'll be talking about in the course in the 7 modules is really starting with the heart of activism and sort of what does that mean, starting to cultivate a capacity for this courage that it takes, really getting in touch with that fierceness that I think we all have, and trying to find that balance and showing up with that fierce energy in a way that also creates and maintains a safe container and space for people to show up also with us. I think that's really important, and really delving in a little more deeply around this moment, this sort of new era for feminine leadership, what that looks like, what that can be, and what that really means. So people get clear about that and their place in it. And then next we'll delve into the why that we briefly touched on today. What is ours to do in the world? So getting in touch with that, going through some exercises to get to the depths of that, and also talking about using that and being discerning in that, right? I know for me in this moment, I feel a little bit like a first responder. You know, every day there's a new assault on a marginalized group. Every day we get new information about climate crisis. Every day there's some new issue. And I think that we also need to be mindful about what is ours to do and where can we be most of service in the world. So we'll be delving into that as well. And next, sort of as an expansion of that, will be identifying what are our unique gifts. You know, what is our truly authentic way that we can show up in our strength? So sometimes we think that, you know, activism is about the march and the cardboard signs and the chants and all of that. And it definitely is that to some extent, but it's so many other things. You know, maybe you are a local business that LGBTQ folks in your community who are otherwise feeling very unsafe and marginalized, they know that your business is a safe place for them to go and connect with other folks, for example. So I think that we can start off with those kind of spaces in the work that we're already doing, and how can we add in this activist piece into who we already are and what we're already doing. And then, man, facing the naysayers, right? This is such a challenging one. And there are a lot of them, right? There's the naysayer inside of us, right? So that negative self-talk that we're constantly working through and working with, which is why I think meditation can be so helpful, and yoga and those types of practices. But certainly no shortage of naysayers out there in the world. And I think, again, this is a particularly clear for women who put themselves out there in the world. And certainly the internet has offered a whole new way for folks to engage in many, many positive and constructive ways, but certainly in negative ways. And so really trying to sit with that and engage with that and understand how to be in that with ourselves and our own negative self-talk, potentially the talk of our families, our communities. And then I think the online piece is particularly challenging to deal with. So we will be talking about that and how we can build a structure to create some safety for ourselves around that. And as we talked about with Marianne a bit, Module 5 will be about self-care and what that really means and what that doesn't mean. You know, I think her frustration around that is important to hear. Like everything else in this country in particular, self-care has really been monetized and commercialized, right? So self-care isn't about going out and spending a bunch of money on these self-care products that you sometimes see, for example, especially on Instagram. But it's really about ensuring that we have the strength and create the resilience to build a long-term movement that creates the structural changes that we need. You know, I truly do feel that the best self-care for me, and I hope the best self-care for the people listening, is creating a world for which we don't need to escape. I've been learning a lot about trauma and trauma-informed work, and Marianne also spoke to that a bit, that yes, that is a part of what we need to do, that inner work, and we need to show up while we're doing it. You know, there are a lot of folks who are counting on, especially people that are in a position of privilege, to not spend the next several years working on our own trauma, our own self-care, and our own selves to the extent that we exclude doing the work that we need to be doing to show up for social justice, environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice, and all of those things that we see happening every day that we need to address in a meaningful way. Module 6, really important, and in many ways to me, one of the real highlights of doing the work, you know, and that's building a network of support, building a network to build a real movement, and also building a network of people that you really, truly love and are in real relationship with. You know, as I look out at my life, pretty much every single person in it at this point is in it because of the work. So along my path, you know, there's been folks that haven't resonated with the work I'm doing, and folks that have. And we've been able to really build a network, not just of activists, right, but of real friends and loved ones that are in real deep relationship together. And this is one of the highlights, right, and also can be one of the challenges of figuring out how to be in relationship, how to be in communication and connection and co-creation with each other. And so this is something that we'll delve into more deeply. And as I said, we have a Facebook group that we'll be building, and there'll be a lot of conversation there and ongoing to grow our own network of folks that are showing up for this work, working on going back into our own communities and duplicating some of those network ideas in our communities. And then last but certainly not least, you know, really casting out forward as we transition out of the course and into the doing of the work in our own communities. What is that vision of the future that we are creating? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? How are people treating each other? And so really showing up for the world and casting that vision forward and making sure that we don't just stay in the thinking about it, that we really shift to thoughtful doing. We really shift to skill and action, you know, as yogis might know. And so that's just a brief overview of what we'll be doing in this course. And as I said, I'm really excited to do it. I have had my own journey of coming from someone who I felt like didn't naturally start out with a lot of skills and have able to grow and evolve to be someone that's making meaningful, measurable change. And so it's absolutely possible. And maybe I'll just end this part by saying when I won mayor the first time, a young woman came up to me and said, "You make me feel like literally anyone could be mayor." And I really take that as a compliment. I think that that's exactly true for the most part, that we really can do the work and we really are the ones that we have been waiting for.
I love that. Well, it's clearly going to be an incredible program and such a transmission of real hard-earned life wisdom from you to so many people. So I really want to see, dozens of new Mayor Harmons in different forms cropping up around the country as a result of this program. So I'll share a little bit more about it. So it's a video-based program. It's live. You get to ask questions. There's a community on Facebook that forms. You also get recordings and transcripts of every single class session, so you can really keep up with it. We also have a number of great bonuses that you can see at theheartofactivism.com. There's a video Q&A session with Heidi called Stepping Up, Next Steps for Showing Up in a Big Way in Your Community. We also are sharing a dialogue that I did with Greg Braden, which was really interesting, on spiritual evolution and the political process. And we also have a dialogue with Marianne Williamson called Conscious Politics, Why It's Critical to Bring the Language of Values of Love and Justice into politics. So we're a lot of extra value in addition to the 7 core modules. And there's a special extra bonus you get when you sign up today. There's actually a $247 value. We had a whole summit called the American Citizens Empowerment Summit, and that includes downloadable MP3s and transcripts from dozens of pioneering, transpartisan, progressive, deep thinking people who are really helping us to transform American democracy. So that is, you get, when you sign up by midnight tonight, but again, that's by midnight tonight, it's our little extra carrot to give you, or a little extra present to give you when you decide, make your decision now that you want to take this journey with Heidi. So again, you can find all the details at the Heart of Activism. We've kept it really reasonable. It's just 3 payments of $109, or you save about 10% when you pay in full with $297. And it's going to start on April 24th and run at Wednesdays at noon Pacific. So it's a great opportunity to take your next step of turning your care and compassion and concern into a positive vehicle for shifting our world and really fulfilling your purpose as well. So what a great opportunity for folks. Thank you, Heidi, for opening up this possibility. I know there's a lot of demands as a mayor that you would take your time to teach people, inspire people, and mentor people who want to step in and follow in your footsteps in different ways. So thank you.
It's a pleasure, and it's an all hands on deck situation, so we need everyone to show up, and I'm just grateful that we get to go through this process together and see activism as a structure for personal growth, and personal growth as a really grounding structure for our activism.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be an amazing program. Again, all of you can sign up at theheartofactivism.com. And when you sign up right away, you get the extra bonus of the American Citizens Empowerment Package. So thanks all. What a great time it's been. Thank you for joining us. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
All right.